When I first drove through the wrought iron gates of Lakeshore Estates, I felt a calm satisfaction wash over me. It was the kind of neighborhood you saw on glossy real estate magazines, manicured lawns, tree-lined streets, and picture-perfect homes with porches draped in hanging ferns. The air itself seemed quieter there, like even the birds respected the order of things. After months of searching for a place that felt like home, I'd finally found it. A two-story craftsman nestled on the curve of the lake, secluded enough to feel private, but close enough to civilization to not be lonely. I hadn't known much about the Homeowners Association, other than that there was one, and that they had a reputation for being organized. I didn't care much. My focus was on the view, the shimmering lake that stretched like liquid glass behind my backyard. That view, and the silence, was worth any amount of red tape. The first day was uneventful in the best way. The movers unloaded the truck, I tipped them, and as evening fell, I stood on my new back deck, a cold beer in hand, watching the last glimmers of sunlight dance across the lake. It was so still, so peaceful, that I almost felt guilty for having it all to myself. I could see a few docks across the water, small wooden jetties jutting into the lake like fingers, each belonging to the homes on the opposite side. I figured the neighbors must have lake access through some shared community easement. Mine, however, was different. According to my deed and the property map, the lake bordered my land directly, and the parcel line extended a surprising distance into the water itself, a detail I'd barely noticed at closing. At the time, it just seemed like legal jargon. How important could that possibly be? The answer came 2 days later. It was early afternoon, and I was unpacking boxes in the living room when I heard the crunch of gravel outside, several vehicles pulling up in a line. At first, I thought maybe it was delivery trucks or curious neighbors coming to say hello, but when I looked out the window, I froze. There were 4 golf carts and 2 SUVs parked haphazardly across my driveway and front yard. About 8 people had gathered, led by a woman in a wide-brimmed hat and pressed khaki slacks, her clipboard held like a sword. They weren't smiling. I stepped outside, brushing dust from my jeans, trying to seem friendly. "Afternoon," I said. "Can I help you folks with something?" The woman at the front, later introduced as Sandra, the HOA president, didn't return the greeting. She adjusted her hat, gave me a look that managed to combine pity and annoyance, and said, "Yes, actually, we need to discuss your use of the lake." Her tone was brisk, practiced. She wasn't asking. "Okay," I said, a bit thrown. "What about it?" "Well," she began, glancing at the clipboard as if reading from a prepared speech, "the lake is owned and maintained by the Lakeshore Estates Homeowners Association. All residents must comply with the HOA's regulations regarding water use, dock construction, and boating privileges. We noticed your property has unrestricted access to the lake, and before you begin using it, we need to make sure you understand the community rules." Behind her, a man in sunglasses, tall, with arms crossed, nodded gravely. Another woman whispered something to her neighbor, and they both gave me the kind of look you reserve for someone who's parked in your spot. "I'm sorry," I said slowly, "but I don't recall anything in my paperwork about the HOA owning the lake. My realtor said it was part of my property line." That caused a ripple among them. Murmurs, a few exchanged glances. Sandra smiled tightly, the kind of smile people use before delivering bad news. "There must be some misunderstanding. The HOA has managed and maintained this lake for 20 years. The landscaping, the dock permits, the water quality testing, those are all funded by member dues. No one owns the lake. It's community property." "Right," I said, still polite but now curious. "So, you're saying the HOA owns it, but no one owns it?" Her smile thinned. "The association owns it. The residents have shared access. You'll find that in the community bylaws." "I see." I nodded, though I hadn't signed any bylaws. My property wasn't technically listed under the HOA jurisdiction when I bought it, something my realtor had specifically pointed out as a selling advantage. But I didn't want to start a fight in the middle of my lawn, so I tried to keep things diplomatic. "I appreciate the clarification. I'll look over the documents again. In the meantime, I don't plan on doing anything with the lake, just enjoying the view. That should have been the end of it, but Sandra's expression darkened. Enjoying the view is fine, she said sharply, as long as you don't interfere with the association's property. We've had issues in the past with homeowners claiming parts of the lake that don't belong to them. We just want to make sure you understand your limits. Now that word, limits, hit me wrong. My limits. I repeated. She raised her chin. Yes. For instance, you're not allowed to install your own dock without HOA approval. You also can't restrict access to the water, even from your yard. Our residents use the perimeter paths and docks around the lake, and that includes the area behind your home. Those docks, she gestured toward the waterline behind me, are part of the community's recreational zone. I turned to look where she pointed. Sure enough, 3 small wooden docks extended from my property line into the lake. I'd noticed them earlier but assumed they were remnants from a previous owner. Now, she was telling me those docks belonged to them and that their residents could come and go across what I thought was my backyard. That doesn't sound right, I said, keeping my voice calm. This property was sold as private land. My deed says nothing about shared access. One of the men stepped forward, puffing out his chest. We'll see what your deed says once you've been cited, he said. You'll get the paperwork soon enough. Cited. I echoed, incredulous. Yes, Sandra confirmed, eyes hardening. Failure to comply with HOA regulations results in formal notice and potential fines. We're just trying to save you the trouble. I blinked, struggling to process how quickly the conversation had escalated. Let me get this straight, I said slowly. You came here without notice to tell me that the lake behind my house, the one listed on my property deed, belongs to you, and that you can fine me for being here? That's correct, she said primly. Something inside me shifted then. I wasn't angry, at least not yet, but a kind of quiet amusement crept in. These people were so confident, so self-assured, marching onto my property with their clipboards and bylaws as if they were government officials. It was surreal. Well, I said finally, I'll tell you what, I'll check with the county records office tomorrow and verify everything. If you're right, I'll cooperate fully. But if you're not, I let the sentence hang. Sandra frowned, clearly not liking the implication. We've been here a long time, she said coldly. We know what we're doing. Welcome to the neighborhood, Mr. Bennett. She turned on her heel, the rest of the group following like ducklings in formation. The convoy of golf carts buzzed back down the street, leaving my driveway littered with tire marks and an odd silence. When they were gone, I stood there for a long moment, staring out at the lake. The docks swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. Somewhere across the water, I heard laughter, neighbors probably enjoying what they assumed was their shared paradise. I couldn't help but smile. Something told me this wasn't over. That evening, as the sky turned violet and the reflection of the trees rippled across the lake, I went inside and pulled out my closing documents. There it was in black and white, clear as day. The property line didn't stop at the shore. It extended 50 feet into the lake, which meant every one of those docks, every plank of wood and nail was sitting on land and water that I now legally owned. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the paperwork, and chuckled under my breath. So that's what they meant by community property. It wasn't community at all. It was mine. And that realization changed everything. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was angry, though I probably should have been, but because my mind wouldn't stop spinning with curiosity. There was something oddly thrilling about the confrontation. Most people dread tangling with a homeowners association, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the HOA had just overplayed its hand. They'd shown up at my door with such unshakable confidence, so sure of their control, that part of me wanted to see just how deep their assumptions went. So, the next morning, armed with a mug of strong coffee and the stubborn determination of someone who refuses to be pushed around, I started digging. My first stop was the county recorder's office. It wasn't far, just a few miles into town, tucked behind the courthouse. The clerk, a kind middle-aged woman named Donna, listened patiently as I explained the situation. When I mentioned the HOA's claim to the lake, her eyebrows climbed. That doesn't sound right, she said. Most lakes around here are privately owned unless they're designated as public or county maintained. She typed a few commands into her computer and pulled up the records tied to my address. A moment later, the printer hummed to life, spitting out a stack of papers that would soon become my favorite weapon. The first document was the deed itself, official, stamped, indisputable. And right there, beneath the legal descriptions and parcel numbers, was the confirmation I'd been looking for. The property line extended into the lake, encompassing a significant portion of the shoreline, including the sections where the HOA's docks were installed. Donna double-checked the boundary overlay on her screen and gave a small whistle. Well, I'll be, she said. They've been building on your property for years without realizing it. I thanked her, made a few copies, and left with a new sense of purpose. By the time I got home, my irritation had transformed into amusement. I spread the documents across my kitchen table, tracing the outlines with my finger, noting every inch of shoreline that technically belonged to me. I wasn't looking for trouble, but if the HOA wanted to make this a battle, they'd walked right into the wrong backyard. That afternoon, I called my lawyer, a practical man named Harris who'd handled my closing paperwork. He laughed outright when I told him about the HOA's visit. Classic overreach, he said. Happens all the time. They assume every home within sight of a community amenity is under their control. But if your parcel isn't listed in their covenants, they have no authority over you or your property. So they can't fine me or enforce their rules. Not a chance, Harris replied. They can send all the letters they want, but legally they're noise. In fact, he added, tone growing more interested, it sounds like they might be in violation themselves. If their docks sit on your land without an easement, they're technically trespassing. I blinked. So, they're threatening to fine me for using my own lake, while they've been using my property for years? He chuckled. That's one way to put it. I'd say you have the upper hand. Want me to draft a formal notice? I considered that for a moment. As satisfying as it sounded, I didn't want to come across as vindictive. I wasn't trying to pick a fight, I just wanted them off my back. Not yet, I said. Let's give them a chance to realize their mistake first. 2 days later, I got my opportunity. It started with an envelope taped to my front door, a thick one, stamped with the HOA logo. Inside was a notice of noncompliance, written in the kind of bureaucratic language that managed to sound both pompous and vaguely threatening. It accused me of unauthorized property modification, citing unapproved access to community water, and potential disruption of shared recreational space. It also warned of pending fines if I failed to cease and desist. I couldn't help but laugh. They doubled down. That evening, as if the universe itself was setting the stage, I saw a familiar parade of golf carts heading my way again. Sandra was back, clipboard in hand, her entourage following like a line of obedient soldiers. I waited for them on the porch, a folder tucked under my arm. Mr. Bennett, she began briskly, stepping onto the walkway. We issued a notice regarding your unauthorized lake access. Have you had a chance to review it? I did, I said, and I've got something for you in return. She blinked, clearly unprepared for that. I handed her a neatly stapled packet, the property deed, the county survey, and a copy of the official parcel map, all labeled and highlighted. This, I said, is a complete record of my property boundaries. As you can see, the lakefront and several docks, those right there, I gestured toward the water, fall entirely within my land. According to county records, the HOA doesn't own any part of it. Sandra frowned, flipping through the pages. Her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally to alarm. This can't be right, she said weakly. It's right, I said. The county confirmed it this morning. And those docks your residents use? They're sitting on my property. Technically, that makes them trespassers. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The others crowded around, craning to see the papers. The man in sunglasses, the same one who'd threatened me with citations last time, stepped forward and snatched the top sheet, scanning it quickly. His face paled. Now, I continued, still calm, I don't mind sharing the lake. I'm not unreasonable. But before you come onto my property demanding anything, maybe check your facts. because from where I'm standing, it seems your association owes me some back rent." That last line hit, like a thunderclap. The group fell silent, the only sound the soft lapping of water against the docks. Sandra's face had gone rigid, her voice clipped when she finally spoke. "We'll have our legal team review this," she said tightly. "There must be some mistake." "I hope they do," I said pleasantly. "In the meantime, I'd appreciate it if you informed your members to stay off my land until it's sorted out." Without another word, she turned on her heel, motioned for the group to follow, and marched back toward their carts. This time, there was no confident chatter, just a cloud of unease that hung in the air long after they'd gone. Over the next week, things got quiet. The HOA didn't contact me again right away, and I noticed fewer people around the lake. The once busy docks sat empty, boats tied up and unused. Word must have spread, because neighbors started giving me wary looks when I drove by, half suspicion, half reluctant respect. I didn't blame them. After all, in their eyes, I'd just flipped the entire power dynamic of the neighborhood overnight. A week later, a letter arrived, this time by certified mail. It was from the HOA's attorney, written in a markedly different tone than the previous notices. Polite, almost deferential. They acknowledged the newly clarified property boundaries and requested a mutually agreeable arrangement for continued use of the lake and docks. In other words, they were asking for permission. I read the letter twice, then smiled. I wasn't cruel, but I also wasn't going to let them off scot-free. So, with my lawyer's help, I drafted a simple agreement. The HOA could continue using the existing docks and access points, but they would pay a nominal annual maintenance fee, and any future modifications would require my written approval. It was fair, reasonable, and most importantly, completely legal. When Sandra came by to sign the agreement a few days later, she was polite, almost meek. Gone was the imperious tone, the condescension. "We appreciate your cooperation," she said quietly, not quite meeting my eyes. "Of course," I replied, shaking her hand. "I'm happy to be part of the community." After she left, I walked down to the water's edge. The sun was setting again, casting a golden shimmer across the lake. The docks creaked softly, their wooden planks glowing in the fading light. I thought about how differently things could have gone, how easily I might have rolled over, intimidated by their authority. But instead, I'd learned something valuable. Power isn't about who speaks the loudest or waves the biggest clipboard. It's about who knows the ground they're standing on, literally and figuratively. Now, when I sit on my deck in the evenings watching the calm ripples of my lake, I can't help but smile. The HOA still maintains the flowers by the gate and organizes their little neighborhood potlucks, but they steer clear of my property line. The golf carts never come down my driveway anymore. And sometimes, when I catch Sandra across the water, pretending not to glance my way, I raise my glass in a silent toast, because in the end, I didn't just move into a lakeside home. I claimed a kingdom they didn't even realize was mine.